Welcome to Comex Connects, the podcast where we explore the ideas, technologies, and people shaping the future of work. I'm Nick Cross from Comex. We're Australia's leading digital workspaces and cybersecurity specialist. In each episode, we'll connect with industry experts and thought leaders to uncover how organizations are transforming the way that teams work, stay secure, and thrive in a digital-first world. Let's connect now. Welcome to another episode of Comex Connects. I'm Nick Cross. Most organizations today are genuinely investing in cybersecurity. They're patching, monitoring, meeting compliance obligations, and doing what's expected of them. Yet many are still relying on point-in-time assessments to understand the risk in their environments, and that can change every day, whether that be through cloud updates, new applications, identity changes, and ongoing transformation. At Comex, as one of Australia's leading cybersecurity specialists, we spent years working alongside organizations who are doing the right things, but still feel that they lack clear day-to-day confidence in their exposure. Now, it's not because their teams aren't capable, but because traditional vulnerability management and annual testing were designed for a very different era. And what we're seeing is a fundamental gap between how fast environments evolve and how often that risk is validated. Today, we want to explore that gap, why it exists, and how a more continuous and business-aligned approach to vulnerability management can provide clearer assurance, fewer surprises, and better outcomes for both technology teams and the business. In this episode of Comex Connects, I'm delighted to be joined by co-founder and technical director from Comex, Qui Truong. Welcome, Qui.
Thanks for having me here. Looking forward to this discussion.
Many organizations still rely on annual penetration testing. But from a business risk perspective, why is that model no longer aligned with how modern environments actually operate?
Today we talk a lot about reactivity and proactivity, and when we look at what it means to go from yearly testing to continuous, you're really changing the paradigm from that reactive to the proactive paradigm. So in the current environment, you're reacting to an insurance requirement, you're reacting to a compliance requirement to do your annual tests. A lot of these requirements are also outdated, but in order to get proactive and actually look at proactively mitigating risk, you've got to look at these, look at your security posture continuously. Because at the end of the day, the criminals don't take a break. They don't conveniently carry out an attack straight after you've done a penetration test and you've remediated everything. They're not that convenient. Unfortunately, they don't play like we do. So you've got to be on top of that. You've got to actually carry out these tests and ensure that you've got a secure environment constantly. And in order to do that, you've got to continuously test and assess.
So what you're highlighting is actually continuous security can actually transform overwhelming annual projects into simple, everyday routines for organizations.
Going from yearly tests to continuous tests means you're going from reactive to proactive. And let's not forget that things change. Things change continuously. They change daily, monthly. The criminals constantly come up with new ways to attack you. And not only that, even the pen testers have to update their skills and update the methodology they use to run these penetration tests. So they're trying to exploit, and with new techniques coming up all the time, the technique they used a year ago in your pen test is now old. So running a pen test and then producing a report, the report all of a sudden is out of date as soon as you run it and as soon as you present it, because the exposure, there's millions of criminals out there, and the exposure is everywhere, and they will find a new way to exploit you. Therefore, your report is then redundant and old.
You're absolutely right there, Qui. Now, boards and executives that we speak to, I think we found that they often take comfort in compliance reports and having a cyber insurance policy for their organization, but why doesn't that automatically translate into real protection?
Everyone's got good intent around all of this, and like the intent doesn't really translate to that resilience. And having insurance, great, like having insurance on your car, but that's kind of a very reactive approach to things. If you've got to pull out your insurance policy and claim on it, the damage is done. The real damage is not just in the loss of the data, but in the loss of your reputation, and that damage is almost irreparable at times. So moving to a more continuous, proactive approach and actually preventing things from happening, you're preventing these disasters from actually occurring. And the assumption that you've actually got things covered and you're actually ticking a box once a year, and that actually makes you secure. That's not really assurance.
Qui, you and I regularly have discussions with customer executives, and I think we found that boards often take comfort in compliance reports and cyber insurance, but why don't you think that automatically translates into real protection?
Well,
So what you're saying is that you think you can have the best solution in place, but the security and the policies and the processes you have to put in place as a team, they exist to try and mitigate and prevent that and minimize how much you need to pay on insurance.
yeah, so a lot of times we find we can actually lower your premium by actually doing a lot more. So having a lot more measures in place, you can prove to your insurance company that you're actually safe as well. So having a rigorous, continuous cadence of testing, remediation, and then validation shows you've actually got a full cycle of actually activity to mitigate. And you don't really have a full cycle until you've actually gone back and validated that your remediation did work.
And that full cycle really means you need to be in that full cycle of continuous testing against this.
That's correct, and that's what a cycle is. It's continuous. And it happens over and over, and the great thing about that is that it becomes operational, it becomes routine, and it takes security out of that, out of that mystic world of, of tech words to everyday language, everyday tasks, and it's embedded into your team. It's not, and your team works together to actually drive this outcome.
At its core, what business problem does continuous penetration testing actually solve that the traditional testing once a year doesn't?
Well, it actually answers the question: are we exposed right now? So if you've done your test at the end of July, and this is February, are you actually exposed right now in February? Because it's been 8 months since that penetration test. Now, between then and now, blind spots have opened. There's a lot of uncertainty because there's been a lot of changes in your environment. There's been a lot of code changes to a lot of the software you bought. So what you're doing is you're converting uncertainty into measurable assurance by carrying out continuous pen tests. So enabling informed risk decisions, and not hoping for the best, because in between your annual test, you're really hoping that you've mitigated enough until the next time around you actually carry out a pen test.
I think the important elements there is around you need to replace the assumption with assurances around your actual environment and how secure you are.
Like anything else, the more you do it, the more data you can collect. And as you continuously scan for vulnerabilities, continuously patch, continuously run pen tests, you're collecting more and more data about where you are and how you fit and whether your remediation works. And as a board member, having a flow of data that that is presented to you and trend analysis that you can look on, you can actually be more informed to actually make better decisions on where to spend your money, what your exposure is, and you can even look at maybe seasonal exposure to risk. So if you've got seasonal staff, does that actually expose you when you've actually ramped up? So, and having one-off pen tests when all your staff, especially when seasonal, are actually not working, doesn't really show a clear picture to the board of where your risks sit and whether you are exposed.
How does moving from point-in-time testing to a continuous model fundamentally change the security conversation at an executive and operational level within an organization?
So you're not looking for that ceremonial security outcome. You're looking for an operational cycle where you're constantly mitigating risk. Correct.
Summarizing what you said there around helping organizations move from reactive findings and fighting fires to more proactive risk reduction. For executives, it's around moving from big bang reports to knowing they have a steady risk improvement policy in place where security becomes more operational and less ceremonial. We're actually then demystifying and integrating into an operations team's daily routine that they have.
A lot of times when I actually talk to our customers about a continuous pen test, they actually fear it because at the moment a lot of pen tests actually requires a lot of setup, a lot of configuration, a lot of negotiation between teams. But if you've left the infrastructure in place to continuously test, then all of that work that's done up front is done on a premise that this is an ongoing project. So not just for a 2-week project with a report as an outcome. So that's the first thing I would say. So secondly, once you do something continuously, you get used to it. It gets embedded in everyday life. It gets embedded in everyday routine. Doing something once a year, you end up with a situation where people forget. People forget what happened last year. People forget what they do this year. And then they end up having to go back, review, so it takes a lot longer. But if it's embedded and it becomes routine, then it becomes a lot quicker, a lot easier, a lot less stressful. And then the great thing is that instead of getting a huge bill at the end of the process for remediating all of your risks, you end up in a situation where that task list becomes smaller and smaller. And over time, the great thing is you can actually have the time and space to potentially remediate a lot of that yourself. So instead of having to outsource a lot of it, because when you've got a big task list, you won't have the time to do it. And a lot of our customers are actually outsourcing the remediation because they just don't have the time or the bandwidth to remediate. But when there's a cadence of work over a period of, say, 12 months, then you're breaking that down, and all of a sudden, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, and that's the result. So inherently, it becomes easier, becomes more cost effective, and becomes more palatable for your CFO to sign off on some of these projects.
Continuous testing is often assumed to be complex or disruptive, but in practice, what are you saying as to how it actually reduces friction for IT and security teams?
Yeah, correct. When you've embedded a lot of your changes to configurations because there's a vulnerability into your ITSM process, you've embedded a lot of your patch management already into your service desk process. So, in actual fact, a lot of what you're doing is already, a lot of what you need to do, you're already doing. So, so your remediation is another task that you're actually carrying out as part of your services process.
Having visibility into where you're exposed, the risks that you have as a business, and having that as part of your routine and not as an exception or a distraction for you where you have to run a parallel process. What you've highlighted really is that the remediation pattern and the way that organizations and team members can work can start to become a more normal change and adopt the approval path that they already have. but security aligns with how the team already work rather than the other way around where it becomes a challenge for them.
Absolutely, Nick. And one of the things that we recommend as well, I mean, this is something that we take pride in recommending, is that you do a pen test, post a change management. So, for example, if you're going to make a change to the firewall, I've seen this so many times where an admin would make a change to the firewall rule, and forget to close up some of the holes that they've opened, because they've needed web access to the firewall to make those changes, or the firewall rules are so complex. There's so many of them because they haven't rationalized the firewall rules. They've accidentally opened up another hole by making a change. So exactly. So the only way is if you run a pen test. A lot of times also, after a change, the testing required is only focused on the change itself. But what if you've actually made a hole in another rule, and you haven't thought about actually testing that rule as well? And if you've got 100 rules, are you going to go and test all of them? Run a quick pen test, and you'll find out pretty quickly that whether you're safe or not. So absolutely, I'd recommend a pen test, not just to validate your remediation, but also as good practice after major changes.
I think the best thing is you remediate what you think the issue is and how to resolve it, and you're immediately able to revalidate again whether you've actually solved that and closed the gap, rather than having to wait weeks or months or even a year to check whether you've properly done that.
Well, it actually makes things a lot more predictable, especially when you've got service providers like us who have adopted all of our tooling and all of our services and providing it in a monthly engagement. So you're not paying those massive fees up front, and then looking at a massive project to remediate. We're actually working with the customer to amortize this work over the course of the year. So all of a sudden, those big six-figure bills become smaller, bite-sized chunks that is much more affordable, especially for a small, medium business that just can't afford not only the time, but the cost to actually remediate. And when you're firefighting constantly through the year, you're going to leave yourself exposed. And the only way you know that you've left yourself exposed is to actually test and assess against it. And a lot of times, I've seen customers, they firefight, and then when they go to remediate, they can't actually afford to remediate, and they've had to live with the risk of actually having exposure. So moving to a cadence of routine remediation and assessment, actually, and especially when you've got service providers like us who have adopted this methodology and costed the methodology in line with customers' budget, we can make it a lot more affordable.
From a cost and risk management perspective, what impact does continuous testing actually have on budgeting around remediation surprises and helping them with financial predictability?
Yeah, absolutely. The monthly model really works, and it works very well with with customers who want to see the smaller bills, who want to eventually reduce the risk, and that risk actually diminishes over time. And where you're used to getting six-figure bills every year, you might get it in the first year, but you're not going to get it in the second year and the third year and the fourth year. No more nasty security surprises. Well, security is no longer a surprise. It's actually embedded in your routine, embedded in your operations.
Certainly what we've seen at Comics, as you've highlighted, is that we've actually been able to help organizations with better forecasting and planning, providing them predictable operating expenses, but we've helped them reduce their emergency remediation costs. That knock on the door of the CFO or the CEO and say, we've had a problem, we're going to need some more money, isn't a comfortable conversation for organizations to have. But with Comics and our approach around Comics Secure Shield and VLN, we can actually help reduce risk without the financial shock.
Yeah, look, I threw an example earlier, and it's I'll use firewalls all the time when I give these examples because firewalls are one of those things that gets pen tested all the time, and that's kind of where a lot of the pen testing sits. Not forgetting that you can pen test so many other things, but firewalls, I see this day in day out. One of the biggest risks to firewall is opening up a management interface to the internet, and people working from home these days. A lot of customers don't have ZTNA. They don't have the secure access that are available to them. So the admins open up a web interface to the internet, and they forget to close it. And that's such a dangerous thing to do. And sometimes, if you're not making these changes regularly, the next time you're going to look at the firewall, maybe 2 or 3 months down the track, and you may not even remember after that. So it could be 6 months before you realize you've actually left that back door open. And these days with vulnerabilities, even the web interface to manage a firewall from the internet has vulnerabilities in there. You see it all the time, and you won't find that unless you actually assess and look for it.
Yeah. No more nasty security surprises anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the statistics, I'll use firewalls again as an example. Anything up to 90% of the vulnerabilities in firewalls are not code related. It's an accident where you've got overlapping rules, you've accidentally opened up one hole when you've made changes to a rule, and the example of the web interface. Those are the most frequent vulnerabilities that we see, and and patching every month. I've got customers who patch religiously, and that's such a great thing. But again, that covers the 10% of vulnerabilities that we see out there. But again, you're not going to see that unless you assess for it and you're looking for those holes.
Although I've seen this in action with some of our customers, can you share an example where continuous testing identified a real exposure that would likely have remained hidden until the customer's next annual test?
Well, in today's environment, everyone's talking about going from reactive to proactive. And that is what you need to do to go from reactive to proactive, where the reactive is the one-off, once-a-year test, reacting to an insurance requirement, reacting to a compliance requirement. But when you're moving to a continuous regime of testing, assessing, and validation, you're then becoming a lot more proactive in how you're managing risk, how you're managing your exposure.
And I think it talks to the point of we're all fallible. The IT executives, the security people know what they should and shouldn't be doing, but leaving something open can be a way for nasty actors in order to try and come into the organization.
Yeah, correct.
Thanks very much, Qui, for your insights, and I know we can speak in a lot more detail on this topic. As we've heard in this Comex Connects episode, for many leaders, this shift isn't about replacing everything they already do. It's actually about complementing existing security, risk and governance processes with clearer, more continuous assurance. It's about moving from periodic confidence to knowing where you stand day to day without adding that complexity or disruption to already busy teams. At Comex, we've taken a deliberately different approach to vulnerability management because we kept seeing the same challenge across organizations of all sizes. Capable teams, good intent, but limited visibility between assessments. Our focus has been on helping organizations overcome that gap in a way that's more natural in how they already operate. If any of this resonates, the next step isn't a commitment or a product discussion, it's simply a conversation. We'd welcome a conversation with you to explore whether the Comex approach is a better fit for your organization. Please look to get in contact with us today by visiting teamcomex.com.au and send us a message. Thank you for tuning in to Comex Connects. I'm Nick Cross, and I hope that you've enjoyed this conversation on how technology and innovation are driving smarter, safer workplaces. To learn more about how Comex can help your organisation build a secure and seamless digital workspace, visit teamcomex.com.au or connect with us on LinkedIn. Till next time, stay connected and stay secure.